The main facility of the Galactic Research Institute on Proxima 7 had all the hallmarks of the most cutting-edge extraterrestrial think tank in the known universe. Impossibly curved architecture, an abundance of holographic displays, enough to make a disco ball feel confused, and Commander Jane stood in the immaculate white lobby, attempting to contain his embarrassment as he announced Chief Researcher Saul and Human Engineer Chen, whose presence continued to baffle them. "Something about your little parking lot of broken starships that no one can figure out." Jaya adjusted his worn leather jacket, a deliberate choice that had already made 3 different alien species visibly uncomfortable. And yet, Chief Researcher, the crystalline aliens' refraction patterns shifted to what Xiao recognized as their version of an eye roll. "The finest minds from 17 highly developed civilizations are housed in our site." Xiao knew this to be the animal form of a scowl that conveys disapproval. "The finest minds from 17 highly developed civilizations are housed in our site. The Propulsion Analysis Center has found these vessels, and they are not just broken, they are the most advanced spacecraft ever found." Xiao commented on how no one can fly them, and Zix's crystalline form went through a series of rapid color changes, the extraterrestrial version of a frustrated sigh. "The vessels have evaded analysis by our top minds. The hive intelligence of the Shrey spent 3 solar cycles trying to interface with a single ship system, and the quantum consciousness of the Meep devoted an entire processing node to the effort." Jiao couldn't help but poke fun at the aliens a little more, knowing full well that their evident lack of professional decorum was driving them up the proverbial wall. The Galactic Council had insisted that Zeal manage their usual icy tones, which had taken on a slightly strained quality, something about having unique problem-solving abilities and thinking outside acceptable geometric parameters, in other words, thinking outside the box. Although he had grown accustomed to being the only human in most rooms since taking on this assignment, this time he was the only human in most of the rooms. Selzel's crystalline form flashed briefly and turned agitated red as they walked through the facility's winding corridors. As they passed by, Jiao noticed the other researchers, who seemed to be sentient mathematical equations and floating clouds of intelligent gas. He asked them not to touch anything that might destabilize local spacetime. Zeigel's expression changed to one of disapproval as Xiao mumbled something about how we have compiled a detailed account of all our failed efforts to activate the vessels. The data package is only a few exabytes in size, so I have faith in your neural implants to process it. The looks on their faces were different, though. They were the expressions of brilliant minds who had hit a wall and were unhappy about the prospect that an archaic human might succeed where they had failed. I noticed that the welcoming committee is just as welcoming as before. I'm about to solve your little starship puzzle using nothing but this squishy human brain and maybe a bit of that coffee I brought with me. By the way, is there a break room around here? I could use a cup before we continue. The transfer doesn't have any implants, Chief, just good old-fashioned wetware. Jiao tapped his temple, and the crystal alien actually froze for a moment, their structure becoming so rigid that Xiao was worried they might shatter. In the depths of the research bay, 7 doors swung open with a dramatic flourish that Xiao felt was superfluous but added drama. Inside, suspended in a containment field that shook like disturbed mercury, sat the most breathtaking starship he had ever laid eyes on. It was about the size of a small yacht, with a hull made of what appeared to be liquid metal and frozen in mid-air. Flow, without visible engines or a cockpit, is pure AR aerodynamic perfection. This is research subject A13, which Zeal announced with their usual dry formality. It is one of 17 identical vessels found in perfect condition within an ancient space dock with an estimated age of around 47,000 solar cycles. As Jaya walked around the ship, she marveled at the way the light reflected off and passed through its surface. Suddenly, a holographic display appeared, showcasing a parade of exotic extraterrestrial attempts to connect with the spacecraft. Jaya observed as energy-wielding tentacles probed the vessel's exterior. Quantum computers sought to forge neural connections, and a group of psychic space jellies seemed to be telepathically communicating with it. Beetle J5 spent 3 years trying to decipher what they thought was a complicated mathematical code, and CXL maintained their crystalline shape, changing shades of blue according to the academic hierarchy. The mechanoid hierarchy. Xiao swiftly intervened, already extending his hand toward the ship's hull. Zill's warning was too late. As soon as Jiao's fingers touched the surface, the entire vessel erupted in a Christmas tree-like illumination. Patterns of light rippled across the hull, and the surface, which had seemed solid before, transformed into a translucent window, unveiling the hidden interior. The Anorus Void Dancers had devoted 12% of their computing power to dissecting its components. Has anybody tried physically touching it? Xiao suddenly cut in, his hand already out toward the ship's hull. Amazing. According to Xiao, who withdrew his hand and watched as the ship went dark once more, Jiao turned around to see all the alien researchers in the room frozen in different expressions of shock, horror, or the alien equivalent of a jaw drop. A cloud of intelligent gas had condensed into a surprised question mark, and after what seemed like an eternity, one of the energy beings finally spoke up. After what seemed like an eternity, the best minds in the world. Galaxy is trying to activate this vessel, and you just touched it. Jiao tried to hide a grin, but he couldn't help but notice that Zill's crystalline form was changing colors so fast that it looked like a malfunctioning disco ball. There are protocols, analyses, procedures, and risk assessments involved. You can't just sit back and watch. Repositioning his hand on the hull, Jiao noticed something different when his palm made contact with the material. Next, the ship came to life again, but this time he noticed something different. Seemed to move with the speed of silver, forming what felt suspiciously like a fingerprint scanner. Xiao asked with astonishment, the most cutting-edge technology in the universe uses a fingerprint scanner? How unbelievable! Jiao pressed his hand firmly against the impression, making a sound that sounded like a satisfied sigh. Xiao's expression could be described as a satisfied sigh, and biometric security systems are obviously not up to snuff. I suppose we can all agree on the reason why none of you managed to get inside the ship, unless, of course, you happen to possess 5 fingers and opposable thumbs. The inside was both exactly as Jaya had anticipated and completely different from his imagination. Surfaces appeared and disappeared as needed, creating an ever-changing interior. What he took to be the control center had no readily apparent instruments. One of the energy beings that had followed him buzzed, indicating that the ship's systems were malfunctioning. Jiao settled into the chair, which seemed to be adapting to his body rather than randomly responding. As he reached out with his right hand, a control panel materialized exactly where his fingers had expected to find one. It wasn't broken, it was adaptive, and the whole thing was fascinating. Zix's crystal form had become quite agitated. A well-designed ship should have consistent internal geometry, so this chaos isn't serving any purpose. Xiao watched as the ship's interior subtly reshaped around him. The point is that it's inconsistent, so everyone has been thinking it's malfunctioning. However, what if that's exactly how it's supposed to work? A mathematical equation started scribbling as it squeezed through the entrance. Whirling wildly in the air, such a design would be incredibly inefficient. The amount of energy needed for constant molecular restructuring would be worth it, though. Jaya interrupted, asking if the goal was to have a ship that could perfectly adapt to any pilot's look. As he leaned to his left in the chair, the entire control center rearranged itself to optimize for his new position. It's not just responsive to touch, it reads my unconscious expectations. Whenever I imagine a control that would be more convenient, it appears precisely where I would expect it to be. A cloud of intelligent gas protested, asking how the ship's systems could anticipate the pilot's needs before they even realized they had them. Jaya explained the phenomenon, while the assembled aliens watched in increasing disbelief as Jiao showed how displays materialized at perfect eye level and controls shifted to match his natural reach. The entire cockpit seemed to mold itself around him like a custom-fit glove. It seems like this ship isn't programmed, but rather operated by human intuition. Any problems you noticed could have been caused by the ship's attempt to accommodate non-human users, but your rigid thought patterns were causing it to fail. A series of quick calculations popped up as the mathematical equation attempted to process this. Were you implying that this advanced civilization intentionally designed their ships to be inaccurate? Xiao corrected, smiling, realizing he could rearrange the entire control system is based on human instinct and muscle memory, which is utterly illogical. How can one navigate spacetime without exact mathematical calculations? Jaya placed her hand over the spot where she felt a propulsion control should be. Sure enough, a perfectly shaped one. Humans aren't neat and tidy. They improvise, follow their gut, and think on their feet. The ship isn't fighting. It's designed for it. The throttle materialized beneath his hand, and the ship took care of the calculations and the intent. It's like how people catch a ball without thinking about its trajectory. Our brains do that automatically. The energy beings explain that the ship, which has baffled the galaxy's top minds, is actually designed to rely on intuition. Xiao said as much, closing his eyes, and I just laid out the ideal layout for the control center in his head. The whole cockpit moved and rippled, with every surface and instrument finding its spot according to my subconscious expectations. When I opened his eyes again, I was encircled by the exact layout I had imagined after years of planning. The intelligent gas cloud had compressed into what looked like a stress ball. It defies all the rules of spacecraft design, but maybe that's why Jiao brought it up. I was getting more and more. In his observation of the collected extraterrestrial scientists, each of whom was showing signs of scientific discomfort, he smirked and said, "After all, if the world made perfect sense, what would be the pleasure in studying it?" Prompting a possible demonstration, Jaya stood up from her seat in the cockpit and made the announcement. His hypothesis, he was sure of. Maybe whomever constructed these spacecraft was aware that there are instances when rationality alone isn't enough to traverse the utter chaos of space. At times, it's necessary to have a species that can handle some disorder on its own. Constantly rearranged itself to its neutral state, much to the apparent unease of the extraterrestrial researchers. Could you retrieve the data from all our prior attempts to connect with the ship? Chief Researcher Zell asked, his crystalline alien form flickering with a sense of relief at being back on familiar scientific ground. Suddenly, a gigantic holographic screen appeared, brimming with data streams spanning 17 different species' endeavors to comprehend the ship. What patterns are these? Jaya gestured towards the screen, pointing to the interface. It appears that pattern analysis has already been carried out. The mathematical equation states that 2,749,823 distinct correlations have been identified across all attempted activation sequences. This is where the problem lies, according to Jia, who is wagging his hands to rearrange the data streams in the hologram. He is searching for mathematical patterns. Someone else noticed that this looks like a dance? The energy signatures that appear when the ship is activated are not random, but rhythmic, like music. Jiao began to hum in time with the data pulses. The ship isn't responding to specific inputs, but to the flow of rhythm and movement. The alien researchers looked at each other with a mix of skepticism and amazement as they discussed humans' incredible abilities. Xiao persisted in conducting the invisible symphony of data with his hands, and patterns appeared everywhere. On faces, in clouds, and even in animals. His attention redirected to the captain's chair. Instead of attempting to control the ship, Jiao sat down and closed his eyes. He listened to the subtle hum of its systems, the way the surfaces flowed and shifted, and the barely perceptible vibrations beneath his feet. It was as if an orchestra had been assembled. Other species might call it a glitch in perception, but it's actually our greatest strength. We don't just process information, we feel it. Concerned, Chinzik said, "Where are you exactly?" Xiao raised a hand and declared, "I'm feeling the rhythm." The ship's interior started to pulse with gentle light, synchronized with the rhythm of Xiao's breathing. In a complicated ballet, displays and controls came and went, swaying like water around him rather than trying to hold their places still. "There is a disturbance in the systems," Xiao said under his breath as he closed his eyes, as one of the energy entities sent out an alert. While synchronization was taking place, Xiao's eyes remained closed. "You can't steer the ship. It was designed to be." Ed raised his hands like a conductor before an orchestra, and the entire cockpit responded. The surfaces flowed like liquid mercury, and the controls materialized and dissolved in perfect harmony with his movements. The ship wasn't just adapting to him anymore, it was anticipating him. The mathematical equations and calculations were becoming increasingly frantic, and the energy patterns were completely chaotic. Jiao corrected as he opened his eyes to watch the symphony of light and motion around him. They were dancing this. It defies all known principles of spacecraft when the captain starts humming an old Earth tune, "Take me out to the ball game," and the ship's systems pulse in perfect harmony with the melody. The controls appear and disappear in time with the music, and the entire cockpit becomes one giant instrument responding to its conductor. The reason no one from your species has been able to activate it is because you're all trying to speak its language, but what it really wants is to feel your music. Engineering Zix's crystalline form quivered with unease as Jiao chuckled, describing it as brilliant. The designers of these ships understood that space is more than just numbers and equations. It's also poetry, art, and dance. Instead of seeking pilots who could calculate the quickest route between 2 points, they sought pilots who could sense the universe's rhythm and move in sync with it. Pointing to the data displays, which were still in motion, he said, "Look at all your failed attempts." Every species tried to impose its own rigid patterns on the ship. Despite our innate ability to wing it, humans do more than adapt to patterns, we create them. We find order in disorder and disorder in order, and we don't only think creatively, we actually disregard the existence of conventional wisdom. The void dancers were the most distant, yet even they were too concerned with accuracy, while the hive intelligence tried to impose it into a collective awareness and the quantum consciousness tried to boil it down to simple mathematics. Upon standing up, Jaya caused the whole cockpit to tremble as if a pebble had been dropped into a still pond. He decided to construct a sculpture instead. To prove his point, he started dancing, not in a traditional sense, but as an expression of free-form movement. The ship responded immediately, its interior reshaping itself to match his rhythm. Displays swirled around him like autumn leaves, and controls appeared precisely where his hands would be in mid-motion. The entire vessel seemed to hum with joy at finally finding a pilot who understood its true nature. Xiao finished his impromptu performance with a flourish, declaring, "This is why you needed a human. We're not just. We're solving the puzzle and becoming a part of the dance." The alien researchers stared in stunned silence, their faces revealing different shades of scientific crisis. The mathematical equation had itself tied itself into a literal knot. Jiao clapped his hands, eager to see what this beauty could do. The research facility's test flight zone was similarly over-engineered, with a massive crystalline dome stretching overhead and a transparent surface marked with enough. Chenzal's voice had taken on the slightly strained tone of someone trying very hard to maintain professional composure. "Perhaps we should begin with basic system diagnostics." Just as Zal was about to finish, the ship hummed to life, its hull rippled with patterns of light that pulsed in sync with Jiao's heartbeat. Word had spread about the crazy human who thought spacecraft should be danced with humans. The entrance materialized. Just as he was about to sit down, the cabin reorganized itself according to his preferences. Basic Diagnostics Jaya smiled and took her place in the captain's chair. "I didn't see the point of it." Around him, a plethora of screens grew like electronic flowers, showcasing various components of the ship's infrastructure. A number of the extraterrestrial scientists began making distress calls on various frequencies as a result of the intense operation of these displays. Jaya said that one of the ship's energy creatures was flickering, and the readings clearly can't be true. In order to achieve such a high power output, the pilot and ship must work in perfect harmony. Jaya proposed using the ship's invisible piano-like controls to do just that. Our ship does more than respond to commands. It anticipates them. It's more than a vessel, it's a partner. Xiao cut in during the discussion, suggesting that the species' reliance on caffeine and improvisation may be necessary due to the high energy requirements of such synchronization. Speaking of which, he retrieved his thermos of coffee, sipped it slowly, and offered the assembled aliens his best smile. The ship soared silently above the launch pad, gliding with the elegance of a ballet dancer. There was no rumble of engines, no visible propulsion, just perfectly controlled motion that looked both easy and impossible. According to standard test protocol, the ship should slowly ascend to Zickle, but Xiao winked and said, "Let me show you what we call freestyle." With that, the ship accelerated so smoothly that Xiao. The assembled aliens were horrified as he subjected the vessel to a series of maneuvers that defied physics and likely some local ordinances. The ship swooped, twisted, and danced through the air like a leaf in the wind, with each movement seamlessly transitioning into the next. It was more like an aerial symphony, with the ship responding to Jaya's every impulse before he even realized it was happening. "It's impossible," exclaimed one of the energy beings as Xiao executed a corkscrew. A maneuver that briefly made the ship exist in 3 dimensions at once, with no computational requirements for such precision. Jaya then called back, guiding the ship through a series of loops that left spiraling trails of light in their wake. All they needed was rhythm and flow. While doing this, he turned on the ship's audio systems, which had apparently always been there. They were just waiting for someone to notice them. He then queued up some classic Earth rock music, and the ship's external light patterns synchronized with the music. In the midst of the test flight, the intelligent gas cloud transformed into a shape resembling a question mark. The ship began to spin in perfect sync with the guitar solo, and Xiao literally danced to the beat. The alien researchers looked on in varying degrees of scientific distress. As the ship sailed through the test zone, its movements seamlessly transitioning into one another. The vessel wasn't merely flying, it was displaying capabilities that violated every known law of spacecraft dynamics. A sensor technician reported that the maneuverability index was off the charts, and the technician's crystalline form vibrated with either excitement or alarm, or perhaps both. As for energy efficiency, the numbers don't add up. That's because you're attempting to measure dance with mathematics. Jiao shouted out as the ship executed a flawless barrel roll. In response to his words, the ship put on a breathtaking visual display, with its hull briefly becoming transparent to show the complex dance of energy flowing through its systems. It was beautiful, impossible, and totally out of the reach of any species that believed spacecraft should behave according to logical principles. But how does one navigate through the mathematical equation, with symbols becoming more and more distorted? Where are the algorithms for gravitational compensation and trajectory calculations? Jiao skillfully maneuvered the ship into a gentle hover, making it spin slowly like a dancer catching a ball. We don't need calculations, because this ship is directly linked to human intuition. We're not just flying through space, we're dancing with it. To demonstrate, he closed his eyes and let his hands flow over the controls in time with the music. The ship responded by creating a light show that. As the days went by, the Galactic Research Institute's main conference hall became increasingly packed with representatives from every major space-faring civilization. Xiao, attempting not to appear arrogant, sat in the front row and listened as ZXL presented their findings. At the end of the presentation, the crystalline researcher announced that their shape had changed to a variety of professional shades of blue. According to our analysis, the work of human engineer Chen with the vessels had resulted in a notable. They need to reassess our knowledge of spacecraft design and human capabilities. The holographic screen behind them showed footage of Zhao's test flight, which had gone viral across galactic information networks. Someone had even put music to it. Zeal kept on in a tone that suggested they still couldn't believe what they were saying. We should consult humans immediately for any future encounters with advanced technology. It seems like their brand of intuitive chaos could be more valuable than initially thought, you know? We're pretty good at winging it, Xiao said, which prompted a wave of perplexed mutters from the aliens gathered around. They were all trying to figure out what the heck wings had to do with the topic at hand. A representative from quantum consciousness raised an appendage, asking, "How can we incorporate such unpredictability into our scientific protocols?" Xiao couldn't help but jump in, asking, "No way! What makes it useful?" Sometimes the best solutions aren't the most logical ones. Like when you ask an energy being to play music to a spaceship, their tone is dripping with skepticism. Just like when Zhao grinned, or when we invented zero because we needed a number for nothing. Or when we decided to put cheese between two slices of bread and call it the greatest culinary achievement ever. The mathematical equation had started calculating the probability of cheese-related spacecraft innovations, just to be safe. The point is that humans don't just think outside the box, we forget that the box even exists. We build sculptures out of it and use it to make music while dancing through space. Sometimes, like with these ships, that's exactly what you need. Zell's crystalline form took on Zhao's configuration, which they reluctantly impressed. The Galactic Council has already approved funding for a new research division dedicated to human intuitive technologies. We can create music while dancing through space using it. Xiao cheerfully suggested the Ministry of Winging It, but apparently that caused too much translation confusion. The intelligent gas cloud from the original discovery had raised what might have been a tendril. The beauty of it is that we can't predict what other advanced technologies will require human intuition, just like we can't predict what humans will do. We looked at a massive ball of nuclear fusion, which he decided resembled a smiley face. Humans were also responsible for the invention of tap dancing, jazz, and the practice of wearing small sweaters on dogs. These innovations were highly unpredictable, as was the ship's performance of various maneuvers, which made the more mathematically inclined members of the audience look uneasy. Occasionally, the universe doesn't require precision, but rather, a species bold enough to try something new just to see what happens. Fortunately, he grinned and pulled out his. As the conference hall burst into a cacophony of worried whispers and enthusiastic discussions, possibly involving 3 distinct species, Zhao sat back, savored his coffee, and pondered the possibility that other broken, technological marvels were simply yearning for a partner to dance with. After all, in a cosmos full of patterns and chaos, there are times when only a species capable of appreciating the beauty in mathematics and the complexity of the unthinkable, and if there was a talent that humans had honed during their relatively short tenure in space, it was the art of making the seemingly impossible seem like a spontaneous dance move.